Today's show is sponsored by Adventures Unlimited Press. Take your mind on a literary journey and go to adventuresunlimitedpress.com to purchase books from our famed experts right here on Truth Be Told. That's adventuresunlimitedpress.com.
What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome back to another broadcast of Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and with me now, world-renowned psychic, Eddie Connor.
Thanks, Tony. Tony, do you know what remote viewing is?
I sure don't, Eddie, but I'm sure we'll find out with our guest, E.M Nicolay.
That's right. Nicolay is an internationally known intuitive, remote viewer, and author who has dedicated himself to assisting individuals, organizations, and businesses to access elevated guidance through a better understanding of their higher self, their life purpose, and even their soul's journey. Now, this is something he calls Essence Path. He's internationally famous as a gifted intuitive healer and remote viewer. Nicolay's Discovering Your Essence Path, Book 1 and 2, is an in-depth look at the next generation of metaphysical learning as well as higher guidance.
In the third book in the series, The System Lords and the 12 Dimensions in the Extraordinary, look at universal structure, the soul interdimensional journey, and the concept of universal ascension, the evolutionary process of the soul and all beings in the universe.
His most recent book, Timeline Collapse and Universal Ascension, continues the journey begun in the first 3 books of the Essence Path series. Now, this is offering practical and unique insights into the soul's journey, as well as new information concerning the future of the world and the true nature of our energetic and metaphysical worlds. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome author, intuitive, and remote viewer, E.M Nicolay.
How you doing?
I'm good. Hi, Tony. Hi, Eddie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
We're great. We actually have a room full of peoples today. So if you hear some female voices, it's not Eddie and I. Just in a
or John
double personality.
I was gonna say I don't have a female.
That's true.
Hey, Gene, I'm back. It's from John from Both Sides Now.
Hey, John, how are you?
Good. Good to hear from you.
And we have Dorothy Lucy going to be sitting in with us.
Hello.
And
Hello.
Natalie Tomlinson.
Hello there, my dear.
So it's going to be a good time, I'll tell you right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, all right. So actually, I want to get started with where you got started, because we talked about earlier with Natalie and Eddie, they're both intuitives and getting to know you and your journey. So tell me how you got started as an intuitive, or because sometimes people don't realize until later in life.
Well, I was the kid who always had that talent. My mother and my grandmother were actually also intuitive. They didn't follow it as much because they were a little bit frightened by it. In fact, sometimes I have to laugh because sometimes they would hear things at night and they would have to turn the TV up so that it could block out the voices that they were hearing.
Oh.
But I was the kid who would always have experiences such as when an uncle had unexpectedly passed away from in another state. I'd be at home and I'd tell my mother, Uncle so-and-so was just here and he wanted to say goodbye. And she'd say, stop that. And then an hour later, someone would call and say that he had been found dead and had died of a massive heart attack unexpectedly. I was also the kid who would get reprimanded all the time because even one experience I can remember, I had the neighborhood kids at the age of 8, 9, something like that, would all be in my house, and we'd be talking to and asking questions of some something that wasn't there, and they would tap once for yes and twice for no.
Ooh.
And all of this before, when you're a kid, before you even know what a Ouija board is or anything like that. And of course, when the parents would find out, they'd completely freak out, and it would become, well, it was just squirrels on the roof.
Oh, please.
Answering yes and no via taps. So what actually happened to me then was, as with many kids who are very, very intuitive and very sensitive in that way, you're taught that it's your imagination, that you shouldn't pay attention to it, and you need to be more down to earth, and you need to be more realistic, et cetera, et cetera. So you go through adolescence, and you kind of put that aside, even though you still know that you're a little bit intuitive, and you pick up on things that nobody else is picking up on. And eventually, I just put it aside. And then when I was in my mid-30s, I was working in New York, a very corporate job. And I had a friend who was a person I was working with who said she knew someone who was a Jungian psychotherapist who did a lot of hypnotherapy, and she needed a brochure, and that happened to be my expertise. So she said, could you help her out? So I did her a favor, and I created a lot of her marketing materials. And she kept calling me, and she said, I like it so much. Is there anything I can do for you? Is there any way I can pay you back? Because I did it gratis just as a favor.
Right.
What happened was eventually I had a very important meeting with a CEO of a big company in New York, and it was to give a presentation. And I said, I think I'll call her up and see if she can kind of just give me some suggestions for relaxation and having a really good presentation. So I went to see her, and she began to put me under, so she would give me suggestions for relaxation and what have you. And within 30 seconds of her beginning this, I had this experience of the walls sort of evaporating, and this cascade of just what looked like waterfalls. And I started to hear someone talking on my right. And I said to her, this sounds really crazy, but could you be quiet for a second? Because I'm hearing something over here, and I want to see what it is. And she stopped everything, and I heard something say to me that this is how she helps people. But if I wanted to, I had a contract to help people in ways that I couldn't even imagine. And with that, I went into a full trance. And when I came out of it, the hypnotherapist was saying, don't worry, I taped everything. And apparently, I had the information that was revealed was that I had an agreement prior to the lifetime to be awakened at a certain point, and that my role would be to help people to discover what their life's journey was all about and what their soul path was, which was called their essence path. And within a very short time, I started having very interesting experiences. I was able to see people's auras. I was able to just intuitively be able to tell people what was going on and what their life path was. I was able to, in just an instant, be able to see the cycles of reincarnation and the cycles of lifetimes that people have had, and give them an idea of how they linked up and why things that were happening in this current lifetime were happening if they happen to be karmic in nature, and on and on and on. And from that experience, I started, the psychotherapist started calling me up for difficult cases, and she started saying, well, I have this case here, and, I'm not going to give you names or anything like that. I'm just going to, ask you questions about it, and I'm just going to give you a first name, and could you just tell me your impression? And it turned out that everything that I said made perfect sense and would help them get to the bottom of whatever the particular phobia was or whatever was going on in that person's life that they were dealing with. That led to her talking to her mentors and her people and her teachers, and before you knew it, I had a number of different psychotherapists and a number of different healers calling me up and saying, well, I've got this case that I just can't get my head around, and could you help me with it? And I would start doing that for people. And that just word of mouth just grew to into an enormous thing where people were constantly calling me from all over the world. And for the most part, it wasn't individuals calling for themselves. It was teachers, clerics, healers. I had priests calling. I had very, very many psychotherapists calling, asking me to help to assist them with different things that were happening. And that's pretty much then how I developed, and that was really when I awakened to what was happening, and it went on from there.
And in what time period was that, from the time you had that experience with the psychotherapist to you full swing your career?
Yeah, that took place mostly in about the mid-'90s.
Mm-hmm.
And then, excuse me, interestingly enough, I started getting calls from some very important people. And I was still really, for the most part, doing this all on the side and still working sort of the day job, even though I was really trying to help people after that. At a particular point, I realized that I had all this information that was sort of being downloaded because it was really telepathic in nature. And I started really doing a kind of automatic writing of the first books in the Essence Path series, which is called Discovering Your Essence Path. And that led to receiving a call one day where someone said, we need you to come to Asia, and we'd like to introduce you to some people. I, at that particular point, was in the middle of jobs, and I had been offered something really major that I won't get into in terms of, like, the career course.
Right.
And I kind of struggled with it and said, I think I'm going to go this avenue instead. And that's when it really took off. Now, from that point, I went over to Asia, and this was in 1997, so it was right before the handover of Hong Kong and of Macau. And I won't get into the details of it because I really can't, but I was asked by a number of very high-level officials to sort of just meet with them, and it was all very friendly. And then they would kind of bring me into a back office and say, could you tell us what's going to happen with this? And could you tell us what's going to happen with that? I did that, and it was very successful, very interesting. Came back to this country, and then received a very interesting phone call from someone saying, "Oh, we've got the perfect job for you." And again, it was related to the career that I was still following at that point. And this is a very interesting story. I don't know if you have time. I'd love to tell it, but I've never told it really to anybody.
Go for it.
And I plan on writing about it.
We like those that never been told before.
So I get a call out of the blue after I get back after meeting with some fairly high-level people in Asia. And this person says, we've got this perfect thing for you, and here's an address, and we need you to come, and it's just tailor-made and lots of money. And I said, oh, this is interesting. Okay, so I drive an hour away, and I looking for this address, and it's this little tiny house at the end of a cul-de-sac, hidden by a lot of trees. I said, well, this is really strange, and I'll tell you, in today's day and age, you probably would have, gotten back in the car and turned around and left. But, at that particular point, and now we're talking sort of the late 90s, before, right before 2000, I knocked on the door, and a nice woman answers the door, and she brings me into a house that's completely empty. And she brings me through a number of different rooms into the back of the house, and she opens the door, and there's this enormous office, and a man standing there in a military uniform. And I shuffled into the office, and I look around, and there's pictures of this individual with his arm around President Bush, the first, and and talking to you name the diplomat, or you name the high-ranking official. And he says, "Oh, we've heard all about you, and we've got this job at a company, and we think that you'd be perfect for being in charge of international." Excuse me. And it pays this much money, and we want you to start almost immediately.
Wow. That's pretty
so
crazy.
I said, "Well, sure, okay. That how are you going to look a gift horse in the mouth like that?"
Right.
Well, so I started, and very, very quickly realized that I had taken a job at a company that was more or less a front company, employing a number of different people who had similar talents as I did. And it's a long story, and I won't get totally into it because it really does get very complex, but one of the first things that happened to me was I'm pretty much of a person who, especially when I was doing the career that I was doing in marketing, would go right at it. And I'm a very independent worker, and I'm pretty good at what I do. So I immediately set about creating this and creating that, and hiring this person, hiring that person, and people from my past life that I had known, and I put together this incredible program. And I was, within months, called into the office of the CEO, and I was sat down, and I was told, "Well, this is all very nice, but we really don't want you to do that." And I was confused, and I didn't know, "Well, what do you mean? This is exactly what I was hired." No, we don't want you to do that. We really don't want to make any waves, and we don't want any notoriety, and we don't want anybody to really kind of know that much about our company. And,
wow.
Okay, well, that's a good one. And what we'd really like you to do is, here's your first project. I need you to just go and sit, and I need you to write your impressions about this and that and the other thing that's taking place in South America. And I said, "Okay, well, I haven't been there, but said, well, just, I don't even want you to research it. I just want you to write down your impressions and your feelings about what you think is going to happen there and what's going on."
In the whole country of South America,
No,
or a certain little point?
A certain country in South America.
Okay.
And I went back, and I said, "Well, I think that they're asking me to do what I do, not in terms of marketing and what my career was, but in terms of what I was being asked to do over the course of the last several years, many years. So I'm going to do it." So as a remote viewer, I actually did take a look at the questions they were asking. I wrote up a report. I told them more or less what I thought was going to happen, what was going to come up in the future, what it entailed, the reason why it was happening, the reason the people who were involved in it were involved, et cetera, et cetera. And they loved it. So I said, "Oh, well, this is, this, now I know something's really happening here." And the story goes on, and I will tell it someday, because I actually did stay there for...
Oh, sure, tease us.
Well, right. I wasn't there too long. I was there for about maybe a year and a half or so.
Wow.
And what happened was, I was traveling all over the world, and I was writing these reports, and I was... strange things started happening to me, where I would be given an address, and I would drive to the Pyrenees, supposedly to meet with someone who was a business associate, et cetera, et cetera. and I'd be, knock on the door, and I'd be led into a completely darkened room in the middle of this little village in the Pyrenees, where there were banks and banks and banks of computers and people just sitting at them, looking at them. And things like that started happening. So I started getting a little nervous.
I was going to ask you how you felt, because that can get a little scary when you start dealing with military, politics, political. Yeah.
All of the
and you
above.
have to understand also that don't forget, and this is pretty much the modus operandi, that I was never told exactly. It's all on a need to know basis. And I was never told that my role was not what they had originally hired me for. But it was quite clear. I mean, at one particular point, I even like 6 months into it, I kept trying to do what I was doing, and I think I increased the sales of one thing that they sold by 200%. I was called in and reprimanded.
Oh my God!
That's not what we want. So I kind of figured it out. But what really actually did it? What it actually did to me was they came up with a tagline for something that they were doing. And this was a high-tech company. So it was a company that worked internationally in high technology. And they came up with a tagline that I kind of saw. And it was, the tagline was, "Let us control your light." And that hit me in a way, because I had known through the information that I was gathering and that I was doing on the side that light is consciousness, and that hit me in such a way that I decided that maybe this is really not what I want to do, and I started to segue out of it. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy, and probably the reason I was there for as long as I was there was because I really had to very, very gingerly, let's say, kind of get out of the place. And even, I am telling you that for years afterwards, I would see people that I had worked with, and in a totally different town, in a different part of the country, within, a half a block away, kind of standing there reading a newspaper. So it wasn't as though they just kind of, gave up and went away, and I was contacted. But eventually, I think they realized that I wasn't out to give the secrets away, and that I wasn't really talking to anybody or doing anything. And now, so many years later, I mean, you're now talking, 17, 20 years later, 2 decades later, I think that things have probably changed enough that they're not, they're really not following me any longer. But then again, who knows?
Wow.
So that's kind of what happened. When I left that, though, I decided that I really did want to do this work, and that there was a lot of information, and that I really did want to be of help to people. And that's when I went back to really continuing to, I call it, download the information and make it available to people as best as I could.
Wow, that is crazy.
It's totally fascinating. So, okay, you took us. We just get us to first base here, Gene. Just get us to first base. Give us a little tidbit that's going to come out in one of your books. Just a tiny little something that's sort of generic and nondescript that won't get you in trouble.
Please.
Well,
it needs to be told.
I'm going to try and think of something that's really not going to get anybody.
So so you're sleeping, I'm assuming alone. What a bad psychic, right? So let's say you're sleeping in the middle of the night. There's something that goes bump in the night. What's the first thing your mind goes to? They found me, or it's an acorn that fell on the roof.
You know what? I have to say that there's something very important, and it has to do with actually even the books. One of the books, in fact, the second book, has a subtitle of Fear, Faith, and Physical Reality.
Oh, wow.
And one of the most important aspects of gaining higher consciousness and increasing your resonance, increasing your vibration for this particular ascension period, is to maintain a state of groundedness and faith, and to believe that what is happening to you, that the universe and your higher self has your best interest at heart. and that it's not willy-nilly, and that you're not just a ship, being tossed on the waves, that there really is a purpose.
100% right.
Now, the powers that be, let's call them, know this, and their way of operating is to try and put you in a state of fear as best as they possibly can. I should back up and say that their first concept is to hypnotize you, and if they can't do that, then they will attempt to create mass fear.
And segregation.
And what they're doing, right?
Yes. Now what that does, and that's very, very important, because when someone is in a state of fear, they really do lower their vibrational resonance, and they lower their consciousness, and then they are very controllable.
Yeah.
But not only are they controllable in the terms of being able to we can push you in this direction or push you in that direction, it actually cuts down on your ability to ascend and to be part of this evolutionary process of the universe, which I call ascension, and to raise your vibrational frequency to the point where you actually then are able to reach a higher resonance and not continue to have incarnations in the coming third dimensional timeline. So to answer your question, it's very important to me, and I've really tried to live that. And each of us, has days for sure. But I really do try to stay in a state of groundedness and a state of faith, as opposed to allowing fear to overtake, because that really does block you, and it really does block your guidance. It blocks your ability to ascend, and it makes you malleable, and it makes you someone who can be manipulated by the powers that be.
Well, I just have a quick question, and it's something that someone in the room actually brought up. Did this lifestyle that was kind of not the gift itself, but into this direction of your professional being, did it kind of make you a loner?
Oh.
I always have been.
Yeah.
But I'm not. It's not that I am a loner in the sense of living out in the woods. It's that I love people, and I have no problem with being people, and with talking to people, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that when you're someone who is extremely sensitive and extremely intuitive, walking into a room of people, whether it be 20 people or 30 people or 500 people, you can imagine the the energetics that transpire, and you get hit by waves. And I'm very good at being able to block out. Now, I'm not someone who hears voices, and I'm very good at being able to, maintain a presence. I'm also very good at being able to get out of the way and listen to guidance, and to tune into to really a higher dimensional level. But at the same time, when you are in that kind of an atmosphere, it can be overwhelming. It can be overwhelming for someone who is just plain introverted. Imagine what it's like for someone who is kind of, every time you turn your head, you're saying that person has this issue and this is what's happening, and then you turn your head and say, oh, that person's laughing hysterically, but oh my God, I see that they're about to cry, and I know the reason why. That becomes a little bit difficult. So it forces you to kind of reserve your energy, and to kind of attempt to, I don't want to say control, but at least sort of monitor where you put your energy and where you actually go. Now, I'm not alone in this, and I might be hypersensitive, but everyone is sensitive to a point. And there's that old Buddhist adage or story about how there's this village, and everyone in the village is fighting uncontrollably, and they're standing in the streets, and they're beating each other up. And one novice walks through the village with a monk, and the novice runs through, and everyone starts to attack him, and he then has to protect himself, and he starts hitting them. And the monk, as he's walking through the village, remains grounded and remains centered, and suddenly everybody stops, and they all stop beating each other up, and they all start becoming friends, and their whole demeanor changes. Now, the story is all about how your vibrational energy is so contagious, and how you, whether you know it or not, are always constantly picking up on cues vibrationally and energetically from groups of people, from individuals, from family members, from friends, which is why it's so important, excuse me, to maintain a certain level of consciousness and a certain vibrational integrity, and sort of stay truthful to your path and to who you are. So this is what I've really tried to maintain. And again, I'm not extraordinary. I'm human. Everyone, to a greater or lesser degree, has these kinds of sensitivities. But really attempting to stay grounded in that manner and remembering those kinds of stories is what we should all try and do.
Well, and there's a question, because we all have the thoughts, we have the feelings, they emit frequencies, and I think a lot of people innocently don't understand that energy, that thought, that feeling that we're constantly sending out has to go somewhere.
Yes,
and it
yes,
affects everybody else.
Yes,
and so
we're taught that imagination is something kafooey, is something crazy. Your thoughts are actions.
Yeah,
right.
Your thoughts have a vibrational quality, and not only are those thoughts being transmitted via your DNA to your cellular structure,
Very true,
that cellular structure is then vibrating at a certain resonance and attracting to it, in terms of the manifestation of your reality, exactly how you are vibrating.
Oh, thank God for that.
And and we're here with Natalie. She's an amazing psychic. She, like you, she's internationally known as well, and she's super, super accurate. One of the things I will tell people all the time, you can be the best psychic on planet Earth. If you have a weak, underdeveloped imagination, you're not going to go that far with it or be of service the way you would like to. I think you have to have a really highly developed imagination that you have learned to harness and control, similar to how you described the monk in the war zone, as it were.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So,
Exactly.
so Gene, what's this deal with extraterrestrials?
We got to know.
It's an enormous question.
It's true. It's very true.
Well, let's see. Part of the reason why we wrote the third book, The System Lords and the 12 Dimensions, is related to giving a little bit of an explanation about universal dimensions, about ascension, and part of that really are the ETs. It depends on, maybe you need to ask me a question specifically. What I can tell you generally is that, yes, they're here. Yes, they've been working with shadow governments and organizations since really the 1950s, and really in a very big way starting in the 1970s. And there are a number of different ones. There are some ET races that actually are friendly to Earth, but unfortunately, maybe for us a little bit, is that the friendly races tend to have a hands-off policy towards interacting, whereas the ones who are more oriented towards service to self are ones who are actually very much involved for their own reasons with these various organizations and shadow governments and what have you. One of the specific stories that is told in the System Lords and the 12 Dimensions, and it's a really interesting chapter, I think, is the story of the Greys. Now, that is a race that is very much oriented, and I guess you need to back up and say also that the universe is, very much, especially in the third dimension, polarity organized, and there is a duality. That duality exists because it creates spin and a kind of scalar wave that then is what draws reality into manifestation. But the Greys, excuse me, and for the most part, the a lot of the races, ET races that you see present on Earth, while there are some that are related to being in the third dimension, many of them are not. And many of them are interdimensional. So they are coming from various other dimensions into this particular one. But the story that I find the most interesting is the story of what is happening currently and will be happening between now and approximately 2569. And that is the story of an ET bioinvasion. Now, that is related to much of the information that you've seen with regard to hybrid humans. And I, again, need to back up and say that this particular sphere and this solar system was designated very, very long time ago as the universe that would be related, or the solar system that would be the home of human angelic soul matrices. And for the most part, I would say that a good, 75% of humans incarnated tend to be from the human angelic race of souls. But there are, and the human angelic race of souls are also of a polarity that makes them oriented towards service to others. What is happening with regard to this hybrid invasion is that in the solar system where the Greys originated, and they are actually in various solar systems, and they are at a higher dimension, and they are also at a part of the timeline that is further in the future. To make a very long story short, through their manipulations with time travel and with time and dimensional warp, they, in their own world, created I think it was about 1,000 years ago, our time, a rip in their space-time, in their dimension. Now, what that meant is that they created within their solar system a kind of black hole. It would be as if in our solar system suddenly we were manipulating with time, which I guess really we are. But things went awry, and somewhere way off of Pluto, we ripped a hole in space-time, and this small black hole was created. Now, the black hole starts to draw everything in, and what's happening in the gray universe is that, or the gray solar system, is that this hole is actually increasing in size, and they looked for someplace on the timeline that was close enough for them to actually come through, and the most ideal situation for them was to come through and make an attempt to populate Earth. Now, naturally, this is not necessarily known to the shadow governments who are working with them. It's not like they came in and said, well, we're going to colonize Earth. But what they did do was they came in and they said, well, we're going to give you a lot of this kind of technology, and we're going to give you enough rope so that you hang yourself, essentially. Scalar waves and this, that, and the other thing. And we're going to, in exchange, be allowed to create hybrid human physical bodies that our ET souls are able to actually incarnate in. So what you have happening in the world right now, as an aside to everything else that's happening, because it's very complex, is that there are beginning to be hybrid humans who are being created, who are human in every way, but who are accommodating the incarnation of this ET race of individuals. Now, there are also a lot of what I'm going to call souls who have come through in human bodies prior to this, who, and many of them are in positions of power, and many of them actually work in conjunction with these shadow organizations. And unbeknownst to them, even though they think they're human, they're drawn to actually work with these ETs because it's part of their life mission and the reason why they incarnated on Earth. And so they are facilitating the work of these ETs in an attempt to actually sort of bioengineer a human body that these ETs can actually incarnate in. What becomes really interesting is that much of the bioengineering, or the geoengineering that is happening on the planet today, you can say all you want that it has to do with kind of like stopping the heating up of the Earth, et cetera, but it actually is an attempt to change the atmosphere, unbeknownst to the people who are actually employing it and using it. It's an attempt to change the atmosphere and to change the Earth so that it is more hospitable to these ETs who are going to be incarnating more and more and more on the planet. And in fact, the population explosion that is happening on the planet can be somewhat related to what is actually happening there. Now, I do want to speed ahead and say, and then brings us to timeline collapse and universal ascension, because that's part of the information that's in that book. These ETs, the Earth itself is a being and has a soul and has a life mission, and its life mission is to guard and to allow the human angelic soul matrices to actually inhabit it. As it sees this happening on the timeline, when we look forward through the remote viewing and techniques that we use, we've been able to see that on the timeline that's coming, the Earth will actually interfere in conjunction with the solar system to, in the year 2569, is what it appears right now, and that could change. But it appears that the current civilization that we know will last until that particular point, at which time, for the most part, almost all of civilization will be destroyed by a cataclysm that happens from off-planet, related to asteroids, related to collisions and these types of things. And that will then, there will be enough left of human angelics to continue on and to begin again without the hybrids. So at that particular point, the hybrid souls and the ET souls will essentially lose, and that is really what is planned on taking place. I should also say that the ETs are not necessarily wanting to make this their home, although they do want to infiltrate. But what they are really attempting to do is they have come back in time in order to kind of gain time in their race against the end of their world, so that they can then somehow figure out a way to change and alter the manipulation of the actual whole that they've created, and perhaps go then forward in time back to their world and seal up the whole that they created. And I would tend to say from our information that much of what they're doing with CERN, and again, unbeknownst to the people who are fooling around with this technology, is related to assisting them to figure out these manipulations with the time wave, and how they can actually then seal up the hole that they created in their particular world.
First of all, we have 3 minutes left, and we're just gobsmacked here. Our jaws are hanging open, and we're salivating at the mouth. First of all, and so you need an HBO series, period, bluntly stated, so you can educate and sophisticate some people, okay?
Thank you. And we haven't touched the surface.
I know that's what we're excited about. But how long did it take you? And you have to give us the Reader's Digest condensed version here, Gene. How long did it take you in your imagination to be able to receive these kinds of things without going, pooey, that couldn't happen, that couldn't happen?
You know, I try and be very, very truthful with what I do, and I'm very, very careful about the information. And I'm very careful about tuning in. I'm very careful about really making sure that it's the truth. The thing about it is that I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm not really trying to create any followers or any kind of dogma at all. There's some information that I have that I'm able to receive, and if it resonates for you, then you're more than welcome to it. But we're not trying to create any kind of dogma or religion, and that's really kind of how I feel about it.
Right. And so this is going to be an off-the-cuff question. Then Tony's going to let everybody know how to get in touch with you. But we all live in the city of angels. There ain't a lot of angels here sometimes, though. When are we going to have an earthquake? Do you know? In the Los Angeles area.
Next week.
I think I'm scared we're going to have one before Christmas.
Oh, shush.
I'm serious. No? Okay.
Well, I mean, it's quite possible at any time. But,
okay.
The truth of the matter is, if you look at the book and what we've looked at,
yeah.
there are some real challenges for the United States and for even Southern California that are coming ahead between now and 2030. And while I haven't looked at a specific thing because it's just never a question that's been asked, right. There are some things that really everybody will need to know at some future point. We don't have time to talk about it now, but hopefully sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Well, definitely this was part one.
I think Gene should book him for bed and breakfast.
Yeah.
And we could go the whole night and talk all night long.
I know, right? Champagne.
and at this rate, I'm going to start smoking as well.
It's fascinating.
I know. You are it's very fascinating.
Gene.
Go ahead.
Big stories.
Seriously.
1 minute.
We have 1 minute.
Long stories. When you bring out your next book, because I can see that.
Well, what I did want to say about California in general is, there is very unfortunately, there is a breakup of the United States that is ahead. And
please tell me it's Texas. And I'm joking.
No, there is definitely going to be a regionalization, and it's all covered in Timeline Collapse, this new book. But we are already essentially in World War III, and we are headed for
I agree.
a real challenge.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it will lead to the bankrupting of the federal government, and it will lead to the regionalization and breakup of the United States. California is a place that you're going to want to actually be, because the Pacific Coast will be one of the regions that will be very successful and will fend off a lot of things. I can't tell you that I would suggest that maybe you want to consider sometime in the next 20 years moving out of San Diego, but from approximately even LA north, it's going to be actually a very good place to be.
That's
Hercules.
I know. Thank goodness we're already here. All right.
I hope we get to meet you, Gene. I hope you make an appearance.
I know.
In person,
it'd be great
we
to
want to
meet
meet
you.
in person.
I like to not hear voice. I want to see faces.
She's very visual, Gene. I can see what she's
seeing. I want to touch, smell, touch, and feel.
Yeah. You smell pretty.
It's nice of you, but you know what? Actually, I do avoid that for one particular reason. We're trying not to create any kind of celebrity around me. It's really about the information.
I agree, but it doesn't matter. I still want to see you.
She wants to touch you.
All right. Well, thank you, Gene.
Thank you, guys.
Well, come back. Now go to essencepath.com. You can pick up his books, find out more about him, or go to Amazon. I'm sure there's other places that you can pick up the books, but these are fascinating.
We're on most of them. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, anything.
Yeah,
all right.
And we'll have you back after the first of the year because we might have to do like a whole 2-hour block.
I know, because this is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We'll have to get some wine in and get Gene in the studio.
Yeah, and we'll put a bar across your eyes.
We have to see her.
An anonymity bar, yeah.
I think, do you know what, Gene? I think you'd really enjoy.
You don't have to do that. It's okay.
Okay.
I think you'd really enjoy being here, honestly.
Honestly,
I think so,
Gene.
too.
Thank you
love
so
these guys.
much.
You're the
been
best.
Great being with you. Thank
well,
you very
thank you.
much.
God bless. Happy Christmas.
If you know,
have a great holiday.
And if you guys missed this episode, you can go to iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn. Now you can listen to us on iHeartRadio. And and you can go check out our YouTube page. It's Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. And follow us there. We'd love to have you subscribe. And we're out. So we'll see you next week. Go to truthbetoldwebtv.com to find out next week's guest.
All right.
Yes. Take care. Have a good one. Stick around for Shar Vision.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.